some new numbers coming out from Gartner regarding the number of devices that are expected to ship out in the next year. And Daphne, some interesting things coming out of this study here. What did the numbers say?
So at first glance, the numbers seem rather encouraging. So Gartner estimates that there is going to be an increase of 0.9% in global shipments of devices, next year in 2020. So that's about 2.16 billion devices. So it might seem like not that much, 0.9%, but actually devices had been going down or declining recently. So it's encouraging. But when you start picking apart the trend, what we realize is that there's something quite interesting going on there, because devices, the term devices as used by Gartner, actually designates PCs, tablets, and smartphones. And when you look at those individually, the trends have actually been directly opposed. So looking at smartphones, they've really been driving the improvement. Gartner expects smartphone devices to improve, well, shipments to improve by 1.7% next year. And that sort of reverses the trend that we've been seeing the last few years, because smartphone shipments had actually been going down. They've been on the decline recently. And when we look at PCs, it's the exact opposite. So over the past few years, PC shipments had increased, and next year they're expected to go down again. And that's a trend that's going to persist through 2021, 2022 as well. So over the next couple of years, perhaps even longer. So it's interesting to see how that term device is identifying both PCs and smartphones as belonging to the same category. And actually those two types of devices are more and more following individual trends and sort of setting themselves apart from each other. So what that reflects in consumer behavior or in enterprise behavior is yet to be seen, but it's interesting in itself that the global shipment device figure is not that representative of anything anymore at all.
And what does it say, Daphne, or does it specifically about, smartphones and why they're going up? PCs, I think some of that's obvious. People just aren't buying them like they used to, or so it seems. So expand on that a little bit about the why behind it.
Yeah, sure. So smartphones, as I said, are expected to go up, and that's following a declining trend over the last few years. The reason for that was that users were getting pricing fatigue. So especially with phones that started being over the sort of psychological threshold of $1,000, associated with the fact that people tend to hold on to their smartphones for longer now. So the lifespan of smartphones is longer. So the replacement trend isn't that strong anymore. So sales had been declining, not equally for every smartphone provider, obviously, but overall sales had been declining for smartphones. Now, next year, what analysts have identified is that with 5G, there is going to be a whole new replacement cycle that's going to start from 2020 as more and more smartphones start integrating 5G, start being 5G compatible. So according to Gartner analysts, of course, all of this is still estimations, but according to Gartner analysts, consumers will be willing to pay to replace their phones to get 5G capabilities. Now, if you look at PCs, as I said, it's the opposite trend. So largely this is due to Microsoft announcing that they would stop supporting Windows 7 this year. So that happened on the 14th of January. So enterprises using Windows 7, there was sort of a mad rush to upgrade to Windows 10. And that typically went through replacing the hardware as well. So they started buying more PCs, which is why we've seen PC sales increasing over the last few years. But now Gartner estimates that 80% of PCs that are using Windows have been upgraded. So that means that there's going to be a decline again in the number of PCs that are purchased. And in addition to this, Microsoft has said that Windows 10 would be the last Windows. So that means that there's not going to be any new OS. There's only going to be updates to Windows 10, again, suggesting that people will perhaps not be buying PCs anymore on the longer term.
Well, yeah, and I think that's a good kind of question or a point there to wrap up on, Daphne. It just seems, of course, that the glory days of the PCs are behind us now. So what does it mean for the future of the PC?
Well, it's a hard question to answer. It's a good point to make that historically, there has been a direct link between new OS and PC sales. So with a new OS, people will upgrade their hardware. So it does bring about the question of what will prompt people to buy their PCs in the future if Windows doesn't release if Microsoft doesn't release a Windows 11, Windows 12, Windows 13. That being said, just because there won't be a new OS doesn't mean that there's not going to be updates. So Windows 10 will get updated, and there will be a point where people will need to have relatively new hardware in order to support Windows 10. So there might still be cycles and waves of replacements. It's not likely to happen before 4 or 5 years, and it's still a question that needs to be answered. And that being said, it's still worth looking at the PC market overall. There are still 1.2 billion devices using Windows, so that in itself, you can barely speak of the declining market. It's still a huge market, and the most diplomatic response is probably that it's a market that's going to change more than disappear. So definitely a spot. It's worth keeping an eye on that spot and seeing how it sort of develops and transforms in the future.
Yeah, most definitely. All right, Daphne, we certainly appreciate it. If you want to learn more about the numbers from this Gartner study, make sure you check that out and Daphne's article on ZDNet. Thanks so much for watching.